But Angela, tell us about that piece and what you and Michael worked on and found out about the failings of the Sanders campaign, because it wasn't just as simple as like Warren killed Sanders.
Yeah.
That wasn't the story.
Yeah. So the editor of American Affairs asked us to write something, and I was kind of happily out of the discourse for a long time. And I was kind of hoping or assuming that somebody within the still acceptable socialist left world would write something, given all that happened, that they may have been just holding things back, and they would eventually write something acknowledging the obvious, very deep problems with the left, the entire project, basically, and that this was just the latest example coming after Corbyn and various others of this kind of general trend we see of essentially the working class moving away from the left. And but it never came, so I thought I'll have to wade back into this horrible, horrible world of just dealing with people who simply, for their own class reasons, don't want to hear certain things. And so anyway, the general thrust of it was that we tried to kind of debunk some of the big things, like the idea that, it was impossible that he ever would have won because he's, such a threat to the system and so on. I mean, Bernie's a social democrat, so, there have been similar figures in American history and many other capitalist countries. But also, up until the day before yesterday, they were saying we're going to win. So then retrospectively, they said, it was always impossible, so therefore there's nothing different we could have done. Then they said that, it was the media ganged up on us. Then they said it was the Democratic Party ganged up on us, which to some extent is true, right? But that's always going to happen. That was kind of inevitable. You have to prepare for that. And that's, to some extent, there are multiple factions. It was such a large field that there are multiple factions within the party in which different people were ganging up on other different people. And no doubt there were all kind of behind the scenes alliances, strategically going on. But really, I thought that somebody had to write something acknowledging that this is part of a broader trend, which we see all across the Western world, where working class voters are moving to the right-wing parties in almost all cases. And the center-left parties are becoming the parties of the, the liberal elites, metropolitan areas, very wealthy states, and that they kind of gloss over this through having progressive social values. And so, but particularly for me, the important thing was that back in 2016, Bernie really had the formula. I mean, he was very, very close to having pretty much the perfect formula of overcoming this problem, because he was able to have cross-aisle appeal. He was able to appeal to rural voters and all kinds of people who were relatively socially conservative even, and so on. And so something went wrong in that 4-year period. And basically the thing that went wrong in the 4-year period was the activist left. Because as we said in the piece, a vote for Bernie in 2016 was a vote for Bernie. A vote for Bernie in 2020 was a vote for the left. Because they had
Not
become...
me, us.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, he even said it himself, that it was no longer about him. It was about all these dreadful people that nobody wants.
The movement
governing their country.
Yeah, I want to kind of push on one thing here, which is really funny about he's such a big threat to the establishment. He not in 1,000 years, they're going to kill him like JFK. I don't know if you guys listened to the Ofe Bunga episode, the recent one about the death of left populism. But essentially, they're making the case that we're probably heading for state capitalism as a matter of course from the right. So austerity is sort of done. So the idea that in this sort of juncture, when Boris Johnson is promising like more support to the working class in the north, the idea that a social democrat would be such a unacceptable candidate to the powers that be, that's just ridiculous. The problem here is probably that a social democrat, if we give this a few years, will probably be much more acceptable within the confines of the right compared to like the Democrats, for example. And that's sort of the
Angela's
thing.
Angela's article says at the beginning of it that Bernie got a ton of airtime.
Yeah.
It's not as though anyone was denying him airtime. It's not as though his views were too dangerous to air. It's not as though he was being kept off big media. In fact, media put lots of Bernie mouthpieces onto its various like talking head hot take circles that they do. And it still had no effect. I mean, there's no danger there, and there was ultimately no effect. Yeah. He lost.
And can I just say one other thing, too, because I've seen a certain inevitable misreading of the piece, which is basically that, it's just more complaining about political correctness. And the thing is, and I've even seen some people who might be described as like anti-woke left or something like that, who are kind of coming out now that it's safe and also completely redundant to do so, saying things like, hey, maybe we need to kind of roll back a little bit of the really wacky forms of identity politics and so on. And they're essentially treating it as almost like a form of manners, right? Like if we change our manners, if we change our style, change some of the messaging, that will basically fix the problem. But it's much deeper than that, because the thing is that the reason that the cultural politics of the left are being rejected is not because, the working class is reactionary and therefore you have to drape yourself in a flag, even though you think it's stupid, just to appeal to them or something like that. The point is that the culture war waged by the left is a class war. They benefit, the people who have been drawn into the left are of a social class that benefit from globalization. In fact, they don't just benefit from it. The DSA class, if you like, right? In other words, the bottom end of the managerial elite, the most precarious members of it, they're kind of hanging on. They're elite aspirants who are kind of hanging on by a thread. And if you take away something like the vast, army of like cheap illegal labor that exists in the US, they will fall out of the middle class. Yeah. Their entire lives are structured by this servant class existing. And so it's not that, it's like some people seem to interpret what we're saying as like we want people to just, as I say, drape themselves in the flag and suddenly be like right wing on social values. It's not that. The point is that their social class is being reflected in their organizations and in its social values.
I mean, Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like so much of this supposedly cultural politics is animated as these like fundamentally disciplinary discourses. Like if your fucking cultural politics mean that you can get pretty much any working class person fired, that's not cultural anymore, Like, if they have that much, authority over people,
These are like people who think that, okay, so you have like slavery in the American South, and you have this sort of view that, some people are natural born slaves because genetically or whatever, they're inferior, more stupid, better suited for hard work. Like, the idea that if you could just tell the plantation owner that, no, well, the latest in science disproves this, there are no big genetic differences, that he would go like, oh my God, I can't have this plantation anymore. These sort of narratives have a material benefit to them. And if you take away like the ideological justification for a system of hierarchy, As long as the hierarchy persists, another ideological justification will be found. And here in Sweden, for example, you have this constant sort of droning about how Swedes are the most racist people on earth. And then suddenly, or pretty often actually, people do studies on prejudice and attitudes like, would you let your daughter date a black man or whatever? And in a sort of comparative context, Sweden scores at the absolute top internationally. But that doesn't fucking matter. Those things, they land with not even a whimper. They're just ignored. And then 2 days after, when everyone's forgotten about it, it's like, oh, well, all Swedes love slavery and they hate black people. Because we have to find a narrative for why a lot of the working class population in Sweden has to be like put on the dustbin, put into the dustbin of history, more or less. And them being like evil racists is why they deserve everything they're gonna get, more or less.
Yeah, because
they
they're
deserve
deplorable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a good way to push. I mean, one piece of the labor force, you can kind of compress them this way. One comes up and is paid nothing. The other one is declining. You can compress them into some kind of just lump.
Yeah.
One is falling because they deserve it. One is here because they deserve it. Not, driving their wages down to like the absolute starvation level is just the necessary outcome of improving the conditions of one and then dropping the other to the bare bones. And it's a fascinating thing. And I mean, Angela, you mentioned in the article like the split of the left fusion, the old left and the sort of new left, the cultural left, the labor economics. It seems to me like the new left wants to merge with human resources. If it could merge with anything, speaking to the manager is the merger that needs to be, has already been made, I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's the easiest one, and the conditions of it are